I'm Tom Davies, president of Sattui Winery, and welcome everyone to now the second of three virtual tastings and to celebrate our barrel tasting party. So welcome everyone, great to see everyone, and like to welcome my team of experts today to join us. Welcome everybody, good to see you all.
Cheers, Tom.
And I won't do a very long introduction, but just quickly like to introduce our director expert of wine and food, and that's Marc Golick. Welcome, Marc.
Hey, Tom. Hey, everybody.
Good to see you. Welcome back. Wink, our executive vice president. Wink, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Tom.
Looks like you got a lot of great wines sitting behind you there. And broadcasting live from our lab is Jason Moravec, our winemaker. Jason, good to see you.
Woohoo!
And then Bob Cuozzo, the manager of our cellar club. Bob, good to see you as well. And then, of course, our director of winemaking, Brooks Painter. Brooks, good to see you.
Hi, everyone.
So I hope everyone has poured their wines already and has them on the tasting mats. We'll be tasting these wines all together in just a couple minutes, but there's a few things we're going to talk about first. So in case you haven't poured your wines, please do so now, and then we'll taste them together in a couple minutes. And most of you were on the show last week, so you're all veterans here of this virtual tasting, but I know there's a few newcomers that are joining us, and the best way to view this show is on speaker view. So if you go to the right side column of your screen and just hit speaker view, you should just see the six of our beautiful smiling faces here, and then everybody else should be at the top. And then if you're on a mobile device, if you're not getting to the right screen, you can just swipe over and you can get to those. And then also we want to hear from you today. And of course, in tasting these great wines, I'm sure you're going to have some questions. We're going to do our very best to answer all those questions. And so the best way to do that is chat. And you want to go to the Sattui Winery virtual tasting, and you can just chat at that window. And we have Ali on the board again. And so she's going to hopefully be directing those questions. And I think most of us can see the questions coming up on the screen, but then if she sees a particular question that one of us needs to answer, she'll get that question to us. And so today's show is great. You know, last week we hunkered down and tasted all the Cabs and Bordeaux, and was a great tasting. We got a lot of great feedback from that tasting. And tonight and tomorrow night, we tackle a couple Rhones and all of our Zinfandels. So we have I think a really fun tasting. We also have a couple great videos that we're going to share with you tonight. We have one from Joe Ramazzotti from the famous Ramazzotti Zinfandel vineyard, and he's going to introduce the two new owners of that vineyard. So you also will hear from them. And then another couple that's they're one of our favorite growers out in Lodi, and that's Joel and Martine Hirsch. And they're going to talk about farming their old vine vineyards. And so for this particular tasting, we have reached back and we're re-releasing a little bit of our 2019 Entanglement and also Grenache. And then all the Zinfandels will be 2020s. And so there'll be a little bit of vintage variation. And so in a few minutes, we'll talk to Brooks and Jason and talk a little bit about those differences between the 2019 and 2020. So when you're tasting these wines, keep in mind, there's a year difference between the ZINS and the Rhones. And when a wine is young, that makes a really big difference. And so I think most of you know about the Futures program. And Bob, if you just want to maybe just quickly summarize the program for just a few new folks. And I know a lot of people this last week, they wanted to place their orders for the Bordeaux, but they were waiting to taste the Zinfandels or they wanted to buy the Bordeaux, but they were waiting to taste the ZINS and the Rhones. And so that they could kind of pile on their discounts. So maybe you can kind of speak to that as well.
Sure.
Well, it's pretty simple. You come, you taste our wines. If you like something, you purchase a case of it. You unfortunately cannot mix and match to get a case with futures. It's a case of wine. You pay half now and half when it's ready. If it's the 2019s, of course, they'll be coming out this summer through the end of the year. And if it's 2020, you'll have to wait a little bit longer until next year. You pay the second half at that point, and you can either ship it or pick it up. If you buy multiple cases, it does increase your discount. So 1 to 2 cases, you get 20% off because this is a party. If it's 3 to 4 cases, it is 22. 5 or more gets you 25% off. And this is a great way if you're going to buy our red wines year after year after year. You save lots of money. We give you a discount on the bottle price before we give you the case discount. So you're really piling up the savings. It's a great way to get our wines at a really affordable price.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And we know everyone watching today has figured that out. And they're usually the first ones that jump on these cases. Well, look, before we get into the tasting, just I want to reach out to our winemakers. And Jason, you know, we and Brooks and I and our winemaking team, we're tasting these young wines all the time. But, you know, for most of our fans, you know, they're not drinking young wines day after day. They're drinking the finished product. So when you're tasting these young wines, you know, what are you looking for? And as you know, what advice can you give the folks that are watching this today as to maybe things to look for?
No, that's a good question, Tom. So like you said, we are tasting 2 different vintages here. So it's important to keep that in mind. We have 2019, the first 2 will be 2019 and the last 4 will be 2020. So to give you an idea, the first 2 have been in barrel almost their complete life and they're about to get bottled in another couple of months. Whereas the last 4, we just finished primary fermentation, even just finished secondary fermentation. So there could be some residual spritziness left over from them from that secondary fermentation. That's the malolactic fermentation. So they're a little bit farther away from being a complete wine. And so while Brooks and I taste these wines, we're often kind of overlooking those. We look a little bit deeper into the wine. We're looking at what does the fruit taste like? What is the richness like? Because a lot of that is just going to persist all the way into the bottle, where a lot of that spritziness or other aromas will dissipate and go away. And then also they will be a little bit more oaky than the finished bottle. The oak will integrate a little bit more and become a little bit more supple.
Now, should the viewers spit these wines? Or is it okay to drink them?
Yeah, so these wines are perfectly okay to consume, even though they're barrel samples, they're unfinished. I would say these are raw wines. They are perfectly safe to consume. Brooks and I would often be spitting these as we're tasting because we would not only be tasting 6, we would probably be tasting 20 to 30 a day. So we would need to spit in order to be ready to make some decisions, I guess. But today it's totally safe. You can consume and they are delicious.
Yeah, they are. Well, look, before we taste these wines, I'd like to ask the next question to Brooks and maybe just quickly summarize the 2019 vintage specifically for these Rhone varieties, and then talk a little bit about 2020. I mean, we all know what happened at the beginning of harvest with the horrible fires, and I'm not sure everyone knows what happened up to that point, because what happened up to that point was actually a pretty darn good vintage, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would, Tom. And when you talk to a winemaker and he or she is saying what is the perfect conditions during a season, grape season, well, we like to say we like rainfall during the dormant period, and that would typically be up to March 1. So the rainfall will recharge the water table and provide ample water for the growing that's going to happen later in the season. 2019 was such a year. We had good early rains and even spring rains, we had some cold conditions during flowering and bloom, which always makes us nervous because we think that it might impact the what we call the set. So we might have really low cluster weight or that sort of thing. So 2019 was beautiful in that regard. We had ample water. We had a little bit of cold weather at set, which just thinned the berries out of the clusters. So it's really kind of an automatic thinning of the crop by Mother Nature. Of course, we go through 2 or 3 times a year, remove clusters that are adjacent to one another that might impact the quality. So 2019 was just a really, really good year. 2020 began as a wonderful year. It was drier in general in early spring. And so we expected that the harvest was going to be earlier than normal. And it can fluctuate anywhere from 3 to 14 days if you look at harvest dates from year to year. So in 2020, we were anticipating that the harvest was going to be earlier and the crop was going to be lighter. Everything looked really, really good. And then, of course, we had the catastrophe of the fires beginning in the 3rd week of August. And so it's still a challenging situation. We have the cellar full of some wines. We didn't harvest other wines. And it's been a bit of a conundrum. But the good news is that the Zinfandels, being an early ripening variety, were pretty much unscathed, which is why we decided to taste these today. And we think that there's a very minimal impact from the fires on our Zinfandels. We think that they're going to hold up to any other vintage of Zinfandels that we've made in the past. The later ripening varieties we're still evaluating.
Okay, great. Well, let's get into this tasting right now. And so I'd like to ask Jason again to kind of kick this off and introduce our very first wine. I know everyone's excited to get tasted. So what is the first wine we're tasting tonight, Jason?
All right, well, let's dive right in here. Our first wine that we're tasting is the 2019 Napa Valley Grenache. So go ahead and get in there, smell it, give it a taste as I kind of describe what a Grenache is all about. So Grenache, traditionally they are found in really 2 different locations. You have your Spanish Grenachas, and you have your Southern Rhone Grenache that's typically found in a blend. Now, our Grenache is somewhere in between. I would say it really picks up a lot of that fruit that you're looking for with a really ripe Spanish Grenache. And yet it also has a lot of the complexities that you'll find in a Southern Rhone Grenache. So you'll get a lot of that spice, that leather, some earthy plum. And there's just a lot of different things that you can pick up out of this wine. And then you go into the mouthfeel. You're definitely going to pick up a lot of that mouth-watering acidity, and the ripe fruits really follow through all the way to the finish. So this is our example of our 2019 Grenache. The vineyard for this is actually coming from our Carsey vineyard. And another thing about this is that when we say when we say Grenache on the label, we actually have the ability to blend a little bit of something else into it. So we will take maybe a little bit of Syrah or even a little bit of Mourvedre, of the other 2 traditional varieties that will go into Grenache. But this will be definitely Grenache dominant. It's going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit smoother than some of the other reds that you'll be tasting. But it's definitely one that's that tastes amazing. And then let's see, the Mourvedre, actually, if we do put Mourvedre in it, it would be coming from our Vittorio's vineyard, which is adjacent to the winery here, which is in St. Helena.
Well, thank you, Jason. And maybe just to have this next question directed towards Marc. You know, we often here at the winery, you do a lot of food and wine pairings, and often Grenache is pegged for that. Why is Grenache so food friendly?
Grenache is an amazingly food-friendly red just because of the lightness of its nature. So it's a racy wine that has a lot of expression in ripe red berries. It also has some florals and spices, but it's not largely tannic. So that makes it more assimilated into just sort of your everyday functioning type of food-friendly red wines. And it's really fun. Everybody asks me, they don't really know, Grenache is not something that you get in more or less 100%. So people ask, well, what do you pair with them? And it does, we're out of season for it right now. Grenache does love the grilled foods. It loves to have something with some smoke and some spiciness to mirror behind it and to give it a little bit more body. But in this time of the year, and it's kind of perfect, because also a question I'm getting a lot is, is it time for Cab and chocolate? It's Valentine's Day coming up. And I hate to break it to people, but at least with California Cabernets, it's just a good reason to eat chocolate. They don't pair very well. There's just too much tannins going on, and the wines will assume a real tinniness. But on the other hand, if you use a light red wine that's not heavy in tannins, like this Grenache, with dark chocolates is an amazing pairing. So if you guys are looking for that ball of red, look to our lighter styles like this, and then into the next wine that we're going to talk about, Entanglement, as well. But the Grenache is a great pairing with chocolate.
Yeah, it's good to know. Well, hey, Wink, I know this is a favorite of yours as well. What do you like about this particular wine?
Well, I'm gonna echo what Marc and Jason have said. It's a lighter body, higher acidity, yet it has great balance as well, and that's what makes it a great food wine. And it's kind of unlike Pinot Noir, which has also a lighter body, but I think our Grenache tends to be a little more concentrated in flavors, maybe a little more silky. I think it's got a really full mouthfeel as well. So, and on the palate, it just has that long presence. So there's also nothing wrong with being the primary wine in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region of the Rhone as well. And we'll cover it a little later on, and Marc mentioned it, but it is a main component of our Entanglement as well. So it's a wine that I really enjoy. It's a food-friendly, drink anytime, or just by itself.
Well, I think the critics also like this wine. Wink, hasn't this won some awards and gotten some good ratings as well?
Yeah, wow, Tom. I mean, I think if you're gonna give it any adjective, I just say consistency. Go back into 2012 at the Winemakers Challenge. It was the best Grenache and scored 94 points. Going up to 2013, best Grenache and 90 points at the Sommelier Challenge. I'll skip 2015, because I know we only have so much time. Wine Enthusiast, 91 points. Somm Challenge, 90 points. Critics Challenge, 91 points. Jump ahead to the 2016 Winemaker Challenge, the best Grenache and 93 points. The 2017 California Grapevine, 92 points. We're almost sold out of this one, folks. 2018 California Grapevine, 90 points. And Rich Cook also gave it 90 points. So it's really, really consistent. And that's what I love about this wine as well.
It's almost one of these wines that just doesn't get the respect that it deserves. And I have to say, those last couple ratings, I think we're in Grapevine, we beat out a lot of the great Grenaches and Rhones from down in Paso. And that's kind of the epicenter there of great ZINS, great Rhones. And then also, maybe some of you know this wine writer, Dan Berger, and he was formerly the wine writer for the Los Angeles Times. He's been syndicated now. He's been in the industry 45 years or something like that. He was quoted recently saying, if he was asked this question, if you were stranded on a desert island and you had only one wine to drink, what would that wine be? And he answered Grenache. And of course, I think the host of that show, there's a radio show, was wondering, okay, we weren't expecting that. But I think it just tells you this is a variety that is, it's really well deserved of its praise. Well, Brooks, we also package this wine in a very unique bottle, and maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Tom. This style of wine that we're making is very typical of the south of France, including the Rhone, the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region, which we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about with the Entanglement blend. And Tom and I and several of our visitors this afternoon were on a cruise with us, and we went to the region. And so to be a little more unique, offer something kind of special for our guests, and as they're enjoying our wine. So I'm going to put this up there. Hopefully everyone can see it. This is our bottle that we're currently using, and you'll see that it has a crest, an embossed crest above the label, and the French call this a cartouche. So it's actually blown into the glass itself, and it's a decoration that we are very proud of. We developed with a lot of care and attention to the design. It's of course reflective of Sattui. So this is our homage to the Rhone region and their traditions of using a unique bottle of wine for these unique bottle for these wines.
Yeah, it's
so we're very happy to. I think it's. I'm trying to remember, Tom. Was it 2015 was our first year, perhaps, when we introduced this bottle?
Yeah, at least it's been quite a few. That's for sure. Well, thank you, Brooks. Well, Bob, let's wrap this wine up. I know everyone's excited to get going here. Why should our viewers purchase this wine?
Well, to summarize what everybody has said, it's lighter style, but lots of fruit, a little bit of spice, beautiful presentation in the bottle. And it's just something a little bit different. If you're doing some, rack of lamb or some portobello mushrooms on the grill, it's a great wine to have with those things, I think.
That's great. Well, thank you, Bob. Well, let's get going. So the next wine is our 2019 Entanglement. And it's no secret that Marc Golick, this is one of your favorite wines. And so why don't you introduce this wine for everyone that's watching?
I do love this wine a lot, Tom. And the reason being is a lot of the same reasons of some of the things that we were describing about our Grenache, is that it's food friendliness. But my palate alone really looks for wines that are a little bit richer and or tannic or spicy in general. And so I gravitate towards the GSM. And as I mentioned, the Grenache, that first wine, that's the G in GSM. And then Syrah and Mourvedre would round that out. And in some years past, and as Jason sort of touched on, we've finagled the amounts of each. And in some years, we've actually had an SGM, having more Syrah in there than Grenache. And I'm so loving this new release. On the nose, this 2019 just explodes with a really ripe, rich red berry. But on the palate, not only do you get that, but there's more complexity. There's more of a chocolate, rich, cocoa, dry, earthy, and rich finish to this that really rounds it out. So as much as I do love Grenache on its own, for some other specific food pairings, I might want to go towards something a little bit richer and darker and more complex. And that's exactly where this GSM comes in perfectly. So if you're a fan of having some, really ripe, racy acidity, a little bit of character and floral and spice, but then having that long lasting, dry, rich earthen finish, that's what this wine supplies. So it's a great wine to serve, again, with chocolates, being that it's on the lighter side. It's not so heavy in tannins, but it just has a little bit more richness and edge than our Grenache on its own.
I heard you mention this wine. You're doing a virtual Valentine's recipe of Eggs Benedict, and that's been really popular. People have been signing up for that. So on Valentine's Day, we can ship some wines, and they get to see you making your famous Eggs Benedict. And that was actually, Entanglement was one of the wines you recommended to go along with that. And I thought that was really interesting.
And it is interesting. And as a wine and food pairing chef, a lot of people would say, red wine with a kind of a white, creamy, buttery sauce doesn't really sound right. It doesn't sound like something classic. And really, to the contrary, is that it's quite a complement pairing. What you're adding is bright acidity, which this wine has. And so as a complement pairing, when you add things that are alike, they actually become more harmonious and become a little bit more tamed down on the palate. So by adding some acidity, of that zip of the lemon juice from the hollandaise sauce, really tames down just a little bit of that bite, that kind of upfront raciness that this wine carries. But having the fat, having all of that butter in the hollandaise to combat, the bitterness, the astringencies, and the tannins that linger in the back of the throat, it is a perfect pairing. And it's so light and delicate that it doesn't run over a dish like Eggs Benedict.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Marc. Well, look, we have a lot to unpack on this wine, because there's a great story behind Entanglement. And Brooks, I think you kind of already mentioned it just briefly, but it was in 2013. It was one of the cruises that we were on together, and we ended up in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, tasting some pretty amazing wines. And so what happened when we were there?
Well, it was very eye-opening, and one of the unique approaches in that region are the use of different varietals, but the main varietal grape varieties that are used, which we've already discussed, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, there's a couple other, Cinsault, Cuozzo, and then other host of minor varieties. And so on our excursion to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, we stopped at a winery, Domaine de la Jeunesse, and we had just a wonderful afternoon. This is a winery that is in the region Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and characteristically, they use about 50%, 60% Grenache, 20 to 30% Syrah, Mourvedre 15%, and then these other varieties that I mentioned. And so Tom and I, we're standing in the tasting room, and we just had our first glass poured, and we're saying, we need to go back to Napa and make a wine similar to this. We can make it this good. So that was the inspiration. And we already had Grenache planted, Syrah. We chose to plant Mourvedre so that we would have the three key varieties. And now we're redeveloping part of Vittorio's. We're going to have another variety used in that region called Cuozzo. So we're going to be, within a few years, we'll be including the Cuozzo in this blend as well. As Marc mentioned, it varies. It's not always the same ratios year after year, where Jason and I and our staff are tasting and evaluating. Some years a little more Grenache, some years a little more Syrah, but we're trying to have a consistent quality and characteristic of this wine.
Yeah, well, Brooks and Jason and David in the vineyard, everyone just comes together and makes such amazing wine. Well, just quickly, the name Entanglement. And I won't go into the story because it's kind of a long story, but just quickly, one of Dario's original partners was Julian Swinger. And he helped Dario get going here back 5 years ago, however long it's been. And he actually was a Nobel Prize winner in quantum physics, great guy. And he has since passed. For maybe some of you watching, you might have had the Julian Swinger Reserve Cab that we did a few decades ago to honor him. And so his memory lives on. And there's now a foundation called the Julian Swinger Foundation, and it's run by a gentleman called Seth Putterman. And he's a physicist and also a professor at UCLA. And of course, he's still being a part of the foundation, part of the Visatui family. And we actually collaborated on this name together. And of course, he loves great wines, and so I was explaining to him, Brooks, how when we ferment this wine, we have this co-fermentation between Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre, and we were, I don't know how it came about, where that these grapes are kind of entangled. And he says, Tom, that's it. This is the theory of entanglement, and it's a spooky action at a distance. And it says it's the perfect name for this variety. And so we have since protected the name. And I think it's a crazy thing that in relativity that you can have one thing over here and over if you affect that, it can affect it somewhere else, and this is spooky action. And anyway, I thought it was an appropriate name for the wine. It's become a really popular wine for us. We're now making about 1,000 cases of it a year. We sell out of it every year. We're almost now sold out of the 2018. I think we're going to be out of it in the next month or two. So we're actually going to get going on bottling this 19 because we're going to be out of it. And so any last thoughts on this wine? I think it's everyone's favorite.
Yeah, Tom, I think the only thought I have is buy it. The California Grapevine just recently said it said it was highly recommended. It scored at 92 points, and for the Monterey Wine Competition just passed here in the 2020, 95 points in the best Rhone blend, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a great wine, and best Rhone blend is pretty darn good.
And also, if you're going to be buying futures of this, as it were, I mean, if you're putting half down tonight, you're looking at about $14.90 a bottle. Okay, I can't argue with that for a bottle like this.
Yep.
It's not a bad deal. Well, anyway, it's a great wine for us, and again, it's one that we like a lot. Well, so now we're in the home stretch here of Zinfandel. Let's get into our ZINS. I'd like to have Bob. Why don't you introduce our 2020 Pilgrim Zin?
Well, the Pilgrim Vineyard is in Lodi. It's a little bit warmer inland, and it's an old vine owned by the Hirsch family. We'll be hearing from them shortly. And usually with older vines, you get a little bit less fruit each year, but you get a little bit more fruit flavor. So this one's nice and fruity with real dark blackberry, real dark fruit flavors, a little black tea, just a fabulous Zinfandel with some barbecue. And it sells fabulous every year. It's right up there with the Ramazzotti, the Quaglia, and the Old Crow Ridge. It's one of the more popular ones.
Yeah, I know a lot of our members really love this Zinfandel, and it's grown in a very special place. Well, Wink, I know this has always been one of your favorites as well. What can you tell the viewers about this wine?
Well, I think I could say a lot of things, but I think again, this is just another amazing wine with lots of accolades, and I think it's one of our most awarded Zinfandels. So for those of you that are watching and joined us for our, I think it was 2012 Harvest Ball, you might recall tasting this wine as a library wine, at least the 2008 Pilgrim Zin, and in 2010 it was awarded the Wine of the Year at the Winemakers Challenge. So we had a great chef from the Alta Adige, Christoph, was that his name, Tom?
Right.
And he's a good friend of Chef Stefano's as well. And I think, don't keep me to this, but I think we might have a couple of bottles of the 2008 left, if Tom will let me sell it, but I'm not sure about that at all. It's just a highly awarded wine. 2011, 90 points from the Grapevine and Wine Enthusiast. It's gotten gold medals. 2017, which is the current vintage right now, Editor's Choice, 93 points, along with scores of 92 points from Ken's Wine Review, 92 points from the California Grapevine, another 3 gold medals. I think it's just an awesome wine. But Marc, I'm going to throw it to you right now, if you don't mind. Any thoughts on pairing this wine?
No, I just chatted in everybody. I wrote prune vanilla pudding, and that doesn't what I want to pair it with. That's what it smells like to me. There's a lot of that deep, rich, condensed fruits, but there's definitely that vanilla spice that's shining through. And I was gonna almost kind of pass this off onto Brooks or Jason and ask, is this from a little bit different barrel treatment? Because I don't pick that up on the nose or on the palate, and I've kind of cheated because I've skipped ahead. I've tasted all of these others, and I didn't really pick up that quality on any.
Well, I think we need to remind everyone that this is, pardon me, a young red wine. This is a 2020 vintage versus we just tasted 2019. So there's still some yeast aromatics, some young red wine, some grapiness, some aroma from the grape skins just coming out of the fermenter. And so you would expect it to be a little different. And so it needs some time. But I agree with you. It's very expressive. It's got plenty of grapefruit, and whether it's blackberry or red raspberry, black cherry, it's loaded with fruit. It's soft in the palate. It's going to be really delicious when it's bottled.
Are you using different barrels, American and French, with this one?
Well, our Zinfandel, along with the Grenache and Entanglement, we use a small amount of American oak barrels, and these are the only varieties that we use a little bit of American oak barrel. So 5 to 10% American oak, the rest is French oak. And the reason I prefer to use the American oak is that it just seems to push the fruit up a little bit more, especially with these varieties that have high natural acidity. You're looking for a little bit more of a cola, mocha cola, and a little bit more of a spice, a chocolate spice. And the American oak helps lift that.
Great. Well, thank you, Brooks. Well, look, let's hear now from Joel and Martine Hirsch. They're, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, they're among our favorite growers. And let's hear their story.
Everybody make up your own verbiage.
So, Allie, we're not hearing the video or the audio on this. Why don't we back up a minute? Okay, we might have to try this one more time. So we're making this up as we go. So hopefully we'll hear back from Joel and Martine in a second. Here we go.
Here where we're located, this is Pilgrim Vineyard. We're just east of the town of Lodi. And this is a 16-acre parcel that has a long history. It goes back, we think, till just after Prohibition.
This is a place, as a matter of fact, a French farmer friend of ours said this is the best place on earth. Lodi is the best place on earth from his perspective for growing trees and vines. And definitely the soil, the climate, the hot days and the cold nights, huge temperature fluctuations here in the summer, 50, 60 degrees when you start getting the delta breezes. So it's really good for growing grapes. So one of the things about this vineyard that we really appreciate is tied to our love of history, because these vines were here before we were. And we don't really know who planted them, but we feel like we're stewards of these vines. So as old vine vineyards are being uprooted, this one is still here and is still prospering.
These Zinfandel plants were planted. We know for sure they go back to the 50s, but we think maybe even the 30s from the characteristics. They put in St. George root, And you'll notice that these look like little trees. And if you're not familiar, and what it means is that the plants are self-regulating. These old vine Zinfandels have become more and more valuable as vintners recognize that they're self-regulating. They don't overcrop the fruit. They don't give us more fruit than we really want. Over the years, they began to be kind of just discounted and forgotten about. And then as we move into the 70s and 80s, Zinfandel became popular as a white wine. And Lodi Zinfandel really made its name in white Zin. White Zin has become a very popular brand. There's gallons and tons of it sold every year, even now. But what's happened over the years is we've really begun to appreciate these old vines and what they do for the quality of the fruit. So we showed up out here in 1998, and we had our 5 sons, and we were looking for a place for them to stay out of trouble and get to work. And we saw this vineyard as an opportunity to do that. And so we cleared off this back area, built our home, and began to try to learn about farming. I was raised actually in Alaska, and Martine was raised in France. So neither of us are, although French should know about this stuff, right? I guess we should expect
But
that.
I did not.
So anyway, we came out here, and my family came out to help us. We ended up ripping out about 500 of the vines that were here. There was a Bermuda grass and some other things going on. It was flood irrigated. Yeah, we had trees in here.
So this really was a family effort.
There's 3 generations of Hirsch's out there working on the vines. We became aware and acquainted with Sattui in 2003 and started to sell our grapes to you folks. And we just had a great run with Sattui. You guys have treated us wonderfully. And what's it been, 17 years now?
John Bunyan, who, going back to England in the 1600s, wrote a book named Pilgrim's Progress, which basically talked about all the trials to be overcome in life. And it was a huge allegory of encountering difficulties and conquering them. And by the time we bought this property, which is almost 16 acres, we had been married 16 years at the time, and we had lived in 16 homes. Now we counted temporary cottages and various places, but we had moved a lot because of education and job changes. And so we felt like pilgrims, and we really felt like we were part of this allegory. And we came here and said, this is Pilgrim Ranch. And so this is Pilgrim Ranch, Pilgrim Vineyard, and Pilgrim Old Vine Zinfandel.
When you line up these grapes on a trellis, there's a uniformity to the fruit. They're all getting the same sun. They're getting the same shade. It's the same focus with the wind and everything. If you look at our vineyard, we try to hang 2 clusters of fruit per spur. There are 2 spurs per cordon out here. And it's much more stingy than a regular Zinfandel that you'd find that would be more mass produced, is what I call it. On a good year, we're hoping for 2 tons an acre, right? And economically, that makes it make a lot of sense why somebody put it on a trellis, because those trellis folks are getting maybe up to 10 tons to the acre. And so the ratio of fruit to vine is so much stronger with the old vines that you get a more potent flavor of fruit that comes out of it. I think that contributes to it as well. I think there's a tradition in our country over the last 2 centuries of agriculture playing a huge role in the character of the families that are growing. And I think I understand that a little better now, because that's kind of the experience we had in our family. You guys have been through a lot this year, and I think it's probably appropriate that we once again express our appreciation for just how well you've treated us and how much we just love what you folks do with our fruit. We every year we ship it out. We go over with it over to the winery, and just to really appreciate how you folks just do great things with the fruit every year. It seems like never a bad year.
Well, thank you, Joel and Martine, and so that gives you a little bit of glimpse behind the curtain of the relationships that we have with our growers, and really that does speak volumes as to how we can make great wines because we have a caring family that has put their blood, sweat, and tears into a vineyard. And I know we're anxious to go on to the next wine, but just one question before we move on to either Brooks or Jason. You know, we talk a lot about old vine. We talk a lot about ancient vine. You know, what's the difference? And either one can answer that.
Well, I've seen both vineyards, and you can immediately tell when you walk in a vineyard, it's ancient. The photos that we just had of those old Zinfandel vines that are, 8 to 10 inches in diameter in the trunk, and they're old, they're gnarly, they're at least 75 to more years old, and what makes them really attractive to winemakers for Zinfandel is, as Joel mentioned, the yields are severely curtailed. Zinfandel is a large cluster, and if left to its own devices, with plenty of water and irrigation, it can produce very large amounts of fruit. But our Zinfandels are curtailed in their production, as I just said. So ancient, I say, over 75 years, and then I'll let Jason address the younger vines and how we approach those.
Yeah, so if we're talking a Zinfandel vineyard that's old vine, I mean, it's still definitely old. I mean, we like to say that it's 50 years old for an old vine, and then 75 plus for an ancient vine. And when you go out and see these vineyards, they're old, ancient. They're definitely a different beast out there. They're gnarly looking. They're reaching up for the sky beyond like how far they should be reaching, and some of the older ones even have moss growing on the side of them. Can you imagine just being out there for so long that moss starts growing on the side of it, just like a tree? And so it gives you an idea of the history behind these vines and these pieces of earth, and they've been farmed like this for so long.
Well, so well said, Jason. And I think at the end of tomorrow's show, we're going to talk a little bit about these old vines, ancient vines, and we're at such risk of these wines disappearing. So it's really, fortunate for us, a privilege for us to be able to make wines from these vineyards and for all of you to enjoy them. Well, speaking of great growers, and Martine and Joel are great friends, we also have a really good friend out over in Sonoma, and that's Joe Ramazzotti. And we've been making the Ramazzotti Zin for as many years or more than we've been making the Pilgrim. Wink, I know this has always been a favorite of yours. What can you tell us about this wine?
Well, I have a preponderance of love for Zinfandels. Tell a little story, if I may, Tom. One of my first visits I made to our vineyards was a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, with 12 of our tasting room staff. And we went to the Russian River and Dry Creek, AVA, specifically to see Sonoma County Zinfandel vineyards. And so on the list was, of course, Crow Ridge and Gilson and Mounts and Ramazzotti. Ramazzotti Joe came out and gave us a tour and talked about those amazing vineyards with head train vines from heritage vines as well. So one of the reasons I liked this wine was just the passion and the courtesy that Joe extended during our visit. It was a great start for me.
Well, and we'll get to hear from Joe in a moment, and maybe you'll understand the charisma that he has, and he's a really fun guy. And Brooks, you and I have the privilege. I think Joe loves the Rutherford Grill, and I think many of you visitors that come to the Napa Valley, and if you ever want to see where all the winemakers hang out in the Napa Valley, come to the Rutherford Grill, because they let us bring our wine in, and they don't charge us corkage, so we're always drinking, we always probably bring 3 or 4 bottles of wine with us for our lunch, and we don't get a heck of a lot done when we go back to the winery after that. But, Joe usually brings one of his sparkling wines. We bring his Zin. We bring 2 or 3 different wines, and Joe loves the French dip. That is his favorite food there. But he's a great. Why is Joe such a great farmer, Brooks?
Well, I think it starts when he immigrated from Italy, and I don't know his exact age. I think it was around 6 years old. And I believe that his mother and his siblings came to join his father, who had moved over. They settled in the Dry Creek area. And of course, his father put him right to work. And so he learned farming and pruning at a very young age. And they were very independent. And Joe has that independent streak in spades. You think that immigrants built this country, and I think that that's true for Joe and his family. They took advantage of every freedom, every opportunity that they had to try to build their life here. And so Joe, how do I put this? He's had a lifelong of endeavor of farming great grapes.
Well, let's hear from Joe. We have a great interview with him in the famous Ramazzotti Vineyard. I think you'll enjoy this. But I think we want to see the one from Ramazzotti, so that's coming up. Here we go.
This is the old Carreras Ranch. Now it's called Hidden Lake Vineyards. And this vineyard, I've been farming this vineyard since 1985. My old buddy Jerry Carreras, who has a great story in his own, he was the Attorney General in Marin County, and he had as an attorney. So he moved up here and bought this vineyard, but he didn't know how tough it was to grow grapes. But we were good friends, and I've been farming it for him since then, and we've replanted some of it. Some of it is still 100 years old. So it's one of the oldest vineyards up here. This was all used to be a big prune orchard right here at one time, except this block. This was all in prune orchard, and then the prunes came out in the 50s, and we went back to grapes in the 50s. I was fortunate enough to, as an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, I had to start pruning grapes and learning all about it. I learned the basics of it as a youngster. But then I was lucky enough to I went off to Chico State. I took pomology, tree and vine specialization. So I learned much more about the whole concept of it, the physiology of the grapes and everything and stuff. So that was a big help coming back to do all this. Well, since 1985, I've had a lease on this vineyard with Jerry. And part of it was a long-term 25-year lease on half of the vineyard, and the rest of it was a lease on it. So as I started selling grapes to so many different wineries, and I've been with Sattui since I think it was 2004. Tom suggested we put Ramazzotti Vineyards on the label, and Jerry and nobody ever objected to it. So we've kept it that way this whole time. And these were all in St. George rootstock and that heritage clone. We actually called it the old Mazzoni clone. It was in Geyserville, and he was one of the first ones that had 100-year-old vineyards, and that's where we got all these. And in fact, this had to be one of the original vineyards planted here. It was planted in 1906. This is not a dry farm vineyard. At one time it was, but since then I have put drip in. The soil here is about 18 inches deep, and then there's this horrible conglomerate rock underneath, and these vines really struggle. These are 40-year-old vines, and they're still struggling to this day. And but the fruit that comes off of it is just intense and beautiful. Again, not overcropped, and it just shows from the area it comes from. I think the more they stress, the more they have to fight for it, the more flavor comes off these vines. This is such a special place up here on Walling Road, which is a no-through road, so we have no traffic. It's just quiet and peaceful. You know, right behind me, you see this beautiful lake that's naturally fed and also with an irrigation well. But this irrigates the whole vineyard, and it's just a gorgeous spot here in Dry Creek Valley. Total is 71 point something acres, and there's about 25 in vineyard. I'd like to introduce you guys to Fran and Lisa, who have purchased the property, and they are the new stewards of this beautiful piece of property. And with them, we're thinking of doing so much work to this area and stuff.
I mean, we've made a number of trips to Napa and Sonoma over the years, and most recently, last summer, we came through Sonoma County on a bit of a wine tour, a few days on the ground, and with the idea that we were interested in buying a vineyard. And so we spent a couple days in Dry Creek Valley, tasting the wine and touring the area, and just fell in love with it. And so we went back to Phoenix and started a search with a local real estate agent from Sonoma, Michael Crane. He's been in the business for a long time, and told Michael what we were interested in and where, and he helped us find it. So after 3 hard days of looking at 20 or 25 properties, this was the last property that we looked at, and it just stood out amongst all the others. This is even before we knew Joe. So we're just very fortunate that we were able to purchase the property and carry on the legacy here. Not really realizing at the time how rich it is, and I think as we've been here now for 6-7 months, just getting started, we really have come to realize all the history and the potential of this property, and we're working hard at it with Joe to make that happen.
Yeah, that was a big part of the draw here, was that it wasn't so much about making money, making wine. It was about experiencing the property and bringing it to the potential of kind of a family and friend retreat, as much as learning the vineyard industry and learning to grow grapes and hopefully make a little wine with Joe once in a while. But it was the property that had the whole package. It wasn't just a vineyard or just a property that held fruit trees or whatever, olive groves. It just kind of has a little bit of everything.
Well, I'm sure you're enjoying these videos, and I think you probably are seeing this, is that it's people like Fran and Lisa and Joel and Martine that have become stewards of the lands. And obviously they're not in it for the money. When you're getting 1.5 to 2 tons an acre, and we're growers as well. And if we were getting those kind of yields in our vineyards, we wouldn't be making a lot of money, probably be losing money. And but they're doing it for another reason. And you're also seeing, these special relationships that we have, and it just makes what we do that much more special. And I hope everyone appreciates this. Well, Jason, these vineyards were in your backyard. You grew up in Sonoma County, and maybe just speak briefly. I know we have a couple more wines to go, but maybe just talk a little bit about heritage vines and what does that mean?
Yeah, no problem, Tom. So let's just take a moment and geek out a little bit. We all like to wine geek a little bit. So Joe talked a little bit about heritage clones there. Let's take a step back and let's just talk a little bit about how vineyards are replanted. They are propagated, they're not planted from seed. So that means you take a piece of a vine and you stick it in the ground and it starts to grow on top of a grafting. And so by doing that, you are taking the exact DNA from one vine and transferring it to a new vineyard. And so that DNA continues to the new vineyard. And so these heritage clones that we're talking about, the exact DNA dates back to these old time vineyards that were established a long, long time ago. In Ramazzotti's case, we're talking about the Mazzoni clone. So the Mazzoni family came to this area and planted this original vineyard back in like the 1800s or the 1900s. But there are other heritage clones, say Black Sears, for instance, that go all the way back to the 17th century. And so it's just really neat that we're able to continue these old-timey vines, not only just growing them for a long time, but it's actually the exact vine that was grown over hundreds or 200s or 1,000 years ago.
Hey, Jason, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Would you age these wines?
So I think that depends on the consumer. So if you enjoy your Zinfandel to be extra jammy, extra fruit, then I would enjoy it upon release. Or if you're looking for it to soften a little bit more, kind of mellow out, I often think that it's a little more food friendly as it ages. I would give it some time. So I'd give it, 5, 8 years, 10 years maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. I know some Zinfandels reputedly can go for 15 to 30 years as well. So different, but if they've got the right stuffing, they certainly can age nicely.
And I'm finding that these wines are changing quite a bit as you go back to them. It's always fun to leave a little bit in the glass so you don't take it all and go back to them. And they change just sitting in the glass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we learn when we do tastings. And you just can't rely upon that very first sniff. And they do develop over time. And just like if you're enjoying wine at home and you open a bottle, and often it tastes a whole lot different, an hour later after you've gotten into it, and often and much better because they just keep opening up. Well, look, we need to get in. We have 2 more wines to go. And Brooks, I'd like to have you introduce the next wine because I think you have thought a lot of this wine over the years. Why don't you introduce that for us?
Well, we're talking about Gilson Vineyard here. And it's been one of my favorite Zinfandels. It's so expressive, it's meaty, it's large, it's big, it's overpowering. But as it ages, it really starts to tame. It's what I love about Sonoma County Zinfandel Vineyards. It's loaded with blackberry, black fruit. And what's interesting about this particular site, we were just talking about what makes Zinfandels different at each location. So I have a couple of props to share. If you can see these, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to, let's see. Okay, so here you can see how polished that stone is. This is an ancient rock. It's as old as the dinosaurs. And that's some of the geologic material that we have here. This comes from the Pacific Plate ramming into and lifting the North American Plate. And it's metamorphic rock. It's old ancient seabed. Here's another example. And this is what, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a green stone, very, very hard. The Native Americans valued this because it's a form of chert, and they could make their arrow points and spear points out of it. Then you get into the volcanics. These are much more recent, 5 million, maybe 10 million years old. This is a recent part of the geologic history, and everyone knows obsidian, this glass material, which was also very useful to the Native Americans. But also what came out of the old volcanoes was this tufa, or tuft, as it's called. It's volcanic ash. So the reason I'm showing you these is Gilson is primarily, the soil is primarily composed of about 12 feet of volcanic ash. It's chalk. And so that impacts the ability of the roots to penetrate the soil. And as you can see, these are old vines. They were planted in the 50s and early 60s. So now we're approaching 70 years old. And so the soil, the location in the Russian River Valley, what the French refer to as terroir, gives this wine its unique characteristic. And Tom, you're right. I've always been a huge fan of these wines. It's just so big and bold and jammy, and it's what I tend to think of a really incredible Zinfandel.
Yeah, we've always loved this wine. This wine has also scored pretty well, actually very well. Wink, why don't you share some of those scores with us?
Well, Tom Brooks mentioned this. It's a terroir-driven wine. It's crafted by Brooks and Jason and their team as well. It's an amazing wine, and the Gilson Zinfandel has been recognized many times by many critics. I'll give you a little example of that, if I may. The 2016 at the American Fine Wine Competition scored 94 points in double gold. Connoisseur's Guide, which is a very highly respected publication here for us wine geeks, 92 points. And then the Wine Enthusiast, which is perhaps more known in the public domain, 90 points as well. So just great. And I just tasted it, and I love this 2020. This is awesome. I mean, this is just the nose is just full and ripe and ready to go right now. And I know it's only been in the barrel for a little bit of time, but boy, what a great wine. It's got other accolades as well. I just will say that the one of the ones we're most proud of is the California Grapevine scored this 92 points, and it was first place amongst the other wines in the tasting. And it was also rated in the Grapevine as very highly recommended. So, and that's the 2018. So I would encourage you, if you like great wines, this is one that I definitely put on my list.
Well, and here's something else, Brooks, and as we know, Gilson is a stone's throw as where the old Crow Vineyard was located. So if for those that love the old Crow, which unfortunately got mowed under, which should be a law against that, removing those century-old vines, this particular vineyard is really not that far away, and I think it does share some great characteristics with that.
Exactly, Tom. It's literally a stone's throw away, and if it was still standing, it would be 105 years old this year. So, but in the meantime, we have made the Crow Ridge Block 7, not as old, but similar terroir, and another great Zinfandel.
Absolutely. Well, look, just to wrap this wine up, this is the weekend that a few of us would be heading down to San Francisco to ZAP. This is ZinFest, the Zinfandel Advocates and Producers. This is where all the producers of Zinfandel get together, and it's been at the Fort Mason, it's been at the Presidio. I think lately it's been at the ferry building, or at the ferry terminal, I should say, and literally 1,000 Zinfandels are poured for thousands of people. And the Gilson is always one we bring down there. Is that right, Jason?
That is totally right. We always bring Gilson. It is just one of those Zinfandels that tastes like a Zinfandel. When you open a bottle of this, you can always be guaranteed you're going to have that big jammy fruit, and that's what you're looking for in a Zinfandel. And so we always bring it to ZAP along with a few others. We'll mix and match the others, but we always definitely have to bring this Gilson.
Well, and I think too, just to wrap this wine up, it has a real purity of Zin. And this is where this vineyard's a little different. This is all Zinfandel. And like the Old Crow or Qualia or Ramazzotti, these are all field blends. It's not 100% Zinfandel in those old vine vineyards. There's some Petite Syrah, there's some Cabernet, who knows else is in. There's even some white grapes and some Golden Chasselas in some of those old vine vineyards. And so this just has a real purity of fruit. And I think, from where we are as winemakers, or you are as winemakers, this is a wine that we really enjoy. Well, look, we have one wine left, and we're running a little bit long, but these wines are tasting so darn good. And Marc, I know you have many favorites here, but I know this particular vineyard is really special to you. And why is that?
Not only every year, but every few months, I'll do a blind tasting of all of our, which now is rich in 13 different Zinfandels, which makes it a fun day. And sometimes that's staff training, but moral of the story is, whenever I do them blind, I always gravitate towards this wine. For whatever reason or another, I find it to be the most complex, the most intriguing, and also it's fun after I name it, being that I've done it blind, my favorite, to find out that, of course, then I have these sentimental attachments. I mean, this is a vineyard that essentially is my backyard neighbors. I mean, growing up as a kid, used to climb over the fence with the boys, and we, ramble through the mustard fields down these old vine vineyards to make our way to the creek to play. So, these Ray and Joan Quaglia being, fourth generational St. Helena Zinfandel farmers, it's just so near and dear to my heart, and always just chase this flavor the most. So I, out of almost every single vintage that I've tasted of our Zinfandel since I've been here, Quaglia has always come in number one for me. And this year is no exception. I mean, on the nose, it's got both bright and dark fruit. I mean, you can smell everything from raspberry to a dark cassis and pruning notes, but it finishes so complex and rich on the palate. Unlike some of the others that I've tasted tonight, at least to me, this has the most longest lasting effect. And in years past has always been that for me as well. So my hat's off to the winemaking team and of course to the growers of these grapes, but this is no exception to what I'll always say about Quaglia. Just an amazing wine.
Well, and I agree with you. We'll talk to Brooks in 1 second, but this this is in the early 80s. I hired Mike Quaglia in 8th grade, and Ray Quaglia has been the farmer of this vineyard, and I think it's his father that planted this vineyard. And I hired Mike to wash the tasting room glasses. I'm not even sure you can hire kids in 8th grade today, but we had a pretty small budget. And I got to then know his dad, and I finally talked his dad into selling us some of the fruit. And so we started in the early 80s buying, all of 3 to 5 tons of these old vine vineyards. And it's been really, it was our second vineyard designated wine at V. Sattui. So we started with Preston Vineyard in 76, and the Quaglia ZIN has just been a part of our family here for so many years. And there's a picture there that you see. There's Ray, and now his grandson Aaron is now working for us in a support staff, and then Mike, his dad, is on the right there. And what a great family. And they're just so much a part of St. Helena. And this is the same deal. If it wasn't for the fact that they are committed to keeping these old vines under till, and it's not about the money for them, because if it was about the money, they would have planted Cabernet. These vines would have been ripped out, and they care about making these great wines. And so anyway, it's a very special place for us. And Brooks, I know you love making wine from this vineyard. Why is it just so special? I mean, we make 13 Zinfandels, and they're all different. But what is it about this particular Zinfandel that stands out to you?
Well, for one thing, unlike Gilson, which is 100% Zinfandel and an opulent expression of Zinfandel, the Quaglia has a few other varieties planted in there, and they're all very limited amounts. I mean, a couple vines of this, a couple vines of that. Tom, you mentioned Golden Chasselas, a white grape variety. This is what we used to call a field blend. And sometimes they couldn't get the right grapes, or more likely than that, the grower knew that they wanted Zinfandel for the fruit, they wanted Petit Syrah and Carignan for the color and the tannin, and they wanted Alicante Bouschet for a whole other reason for adding complexity to the wine. And so that's what we have here. I haven't actually done, the vine count to identify all the vines, but I know it's not 100% Zinfandel. It's at least 90% Zinfandel. But these other varieties are really important. And then on top of that, we just talked about soil. So these are alluvial fans that came out of the Mayacamas Mountains. They're very, very well drained. They have a lot of gravel, a lot of pebble, and they were dry farmed for years and years, and most of it is still dry farmed. That's what makes it really unique, I think, in my mind. Just another note that many people may or may not know, Vittorio's original retail outlet in North Beach was called the St. Helena Wine Company. And he was purchasing grapes from St. Helena. So it's fun to know that the circle comes back to its roots. And Dario's refounding Sattui is here in St. Helena. And I think that when I discovered that, I thought that was so special.
Well, St. Helena is a really special place for us. And, again, the quality ZIN has been one of my favorites. And Ray, along with my father-in-law, Chops, founded the St. Helena Bocce League in St. Helena. This is 1989. So Ray became the capo on our team for decades. And so I can't tell you not only the number of bottles of this quality ZIN, but Ray, of course, made his own homemade quality Zinfandel. And what I remember about that wine is that under alcohol, he had a question mark, and meaning that I think it was off the chart. And he'd always pick at the end of the season, so lots of sugars, made lots of alcohol. Well, Bob, this is always a great, great seller for us. Our members love this wine. What is some of the feedback you get from our members about this wine?
Oh, they just love this one. It's you just have to taste this, and you want it. So the ancient vine, it's packed with fruit. It's got complexity. It's a fabulous food wine, and it's got the history of St. Helena and the Qualia family. Everybody loves this. It's limited to how much we make. And this is like up there with the old Crow Ridge for what people wanted. So now it's even more wanted because we don't have the Crow Ridge anymore. But it's, Marc, he loves this one. I love this one. I love the Ramazzotti. There's so many. Somebody asked me once, can you explain all your different Zinfandels? I said, do you have 2 weeks? The easiest way is it's either really fruity, really spicy, or somewhere in between. But they're all fabulous, and depending on what you're eating with it, and your personal likes and dislikes. But it is super well received, this one.
Well, thank you, Bob. Hey, we had a question too. I wanted to get out to the panel, and Brooks or Jason, maybe you can speak to this. Larry asked us, well, were these ZINs, as obviously they taste great. We're not tasting the effects of smoke taint, but were they affected by the fires, or as we know, the fires started on the first day of harvest. So why were these ZINs not affected while the Cabernets were?
Jason, you want to give your perspective? I can chime in, of course, but my take on it, and this is going to be interesting for people to understand as well. Each grape variety has its own genetic code and is more or less susceptible to the impacts of smoke. Zinfandel seems to be less impacted But the overriding, I think, benefit that we had in 2020 was that Zinfandels, especially dry farmed old vine Zinfandels, they mature earlier in the season than most other red grapes. So we brought these in before there was much of an impact of smoke. And so I think those two things combined are the reason that they're showing so well, when we have other varieties that might have been picked a little bit later that suffered a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. We got these in much earlier, and you're seeing the results. And just like the white wines too, were totally unaffected this last year by the fires. You know, they came in much earlier, and of course you get those wines off the skins, and that's often where you get some of the smoky compounds is in those skins. Well, look, Marc, let's wrap this up. I know there's a lot of people itching to get some of these wines. How do they go about doing that?
Well, I gotta be honest, if you guys don't jump on this stuff tonight, or I think, what are we allowing? The next week to be able to get on these deals?
Yeah, I think we're giving them till I think about Monday, really, because some of these are so limited, and we wanted to make sure people had the ability to see all the virtual tastings. So definitely those that are joining us tomorrow night can see that. But then come Monday, that's the day that they gotta get their order in. If not, so
Here's what I would say is that anything you fell in love with tonight, go ahead, call us tomorrow, get it locked in, or do it tomorrow at the conclusion of part 2 of our ZINS and Rhones tasting, because you guys are never going to see any better prices than this. I mean, I never really like to look at prices. I always just kind of want to love the wine and don't really care what it does to me if I love it that much. But I'm looking over some of this stuff, and even without applying a multi-case discount, you guys are never going to see any prices better than this. And the wines, even being as young, these are just such babies, but even being at this state, they're already showing so well. And I know you guys can already taste that at home. So lock it in, call in your futures, and tag it on with some current vintage stuff too, if you need it. I mean, we've all been putting a hell of a dent in our cellars through this whole COVID experience. So it's time to re-up the supply, you guys. And our barrel tasting parties in this time of the year is our best pricing of the year. So I would say to you, honestly, jump on it. If there's something you've fallen in love with, don't wait, because there's not a lot of these.
Well, really well said, Marc. Well, thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank all of you, my staff, this panel tonight, for your great contributions and all your hard work. This has really been fun. I'm, given what we've learned doing these things, that we're hopefully can find ways in the future that we can do more of these, because it's fun for us. And then they're going to be preserved in history. We've recorded these. And so there's a lot of great information that I think will be hopefully preserved. And just one last thing, if you love these ZINS, please keep buying them, because that's the only way that we're going to preserve these old vine vineyards, that we can continue buying this fruit and paying these growers really well. I mean, we're paying some of these growers some really top-notch prices to keep this Zinfandel under till. And so that's really the one thing that you can do to continue these selling these and enjoying these heritage vineyards. And I just want to thank Allie for the great job that she has done behind the scenes, and great job putting this show together. It looks like we're going to see all of you back here again tomorrow night to wrap it up. And boy, we're gonna bring out the big guns with the Black Sears and a few of the other really top-notch Zinfandels, and you're gonna enjoy tomorrow. So hopefully you see all of you back there again. And so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you Saturday night.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Salute.
Visit, come visit.
Salute.